The wind howled across the Montana prairie, a relentless force that bent the brittle grass and sent clouds of dust swirling into the vast, amber sky. The horizon stretched endlessly, broken only by the jagged silhouette of the Absarica Mountains, their peaks clawing at the gathering storm clouds. The air carried the sharp tang of sagebrush, mingling with the earthy musk of the dry soil, and the distant rumble of thunder promised a tempest. Dr. Lena Whitefeather, a wildlife biologist with the Blackfeet Nation, paused on the ridge, her boots crunching against the gravelly earth. Her dark braid whipped in the wind, and she shielded her eyes against the glare of the late afternoon sun, scanning the expanse below. Lena had spent 2 decades studying the buffalo herds of the Great Plains, her work driven by a deep reverence for the animal her people called Thinii, the lifeblood of the prairie. Her weathered field journal, tucked into her canvas jacket, was filled with notes on their migrations, their social bonds, their stubborn resilience in a world that had nearly erased them. Today, she was tracking a small herd reported near the Two Medicine River, a remote stretch of land where the prairie met the foothills. A local rancher, Tom Grayson, had called her that morning, his voice tight with unease. "Something's off with one of your buffalo," he'd said. "Big bull, acting strange. You'd better come see." Now, as Lena crested the ridge, her breath caught. Below, in a shallow draw framed by clumps of yucca and sage, stood a massive buffalo bull. He was a colossus, easily 2,000 pounds, his shoulders a broad wall of muscle beneath a chestnut-brown coat matted with dust and burrs. His curved horns gleamed dully in the fading light, and his black eyes held a glint of something, resolve, perhaps, or pain. But it was his stance that stopped Lena cold. The bull stood rooted to the spot, his massive head lowered, his hooves planted as if guarding a sacred relic. Blood streaked his flank, dark and glistening, and his breathing came in heavy, labored huffs, each exhale a faint cloud in the cooling air. He didn't move, didn't snort or paw the ground as a healthy bull might. He simply stood, unyielding, despite the obvious pain. Lena's heart quickened. She'd seen wounded buffalo before, gored by rivals, tangled in barbed wire, or weakened by drought, but this was different. The bull's stillness was unnatural, almost deliberate. She crouched low, her fingers brushing the dry grass, and whispered, "What's got you, old man?" Her voice was soft, reverent, as if speaking to an elder. She glanced back at Tom, who had followed her up the ridge, his weathered face creased with concern. Beside him stood Sarah, a young wildlife volunteer with wide eyes and a camera slung around her neck. Both waited for Lena's lead. "Stay back," Lena said, her voice firm but calm. "He's hurt, but he's not running. That's not normal." She eased forward, her boots silent against the earth, her eyes locked on the buffalo. The wind carried his scent now, a mix of musk and blood, and she noted the gash along his flank, deep, ragged, as if torn by claws. A bear, perhaps, or something worse. But what held her attention was the faint sound beneath the wind, a low, guttural moan, not from the buffalo but from something nearby. Lena froze, her pulse hammering. The sound came again, weak but unmistakable, from the patch of ground the buffalo guarded. She squinted, trying to make sense of the shadows beneath his bulk. The bull shifted slightly, his massive head swinging toward her, and for a moment, their eyes met. His gaze wasn't aggressive, not the wild challenge she'd seen in cornered bulls. It was something else, pleading, almost, as if he were asking her to understand. "Tom," Lena called softly, not breaking eye contact with the bull. "You hear that?" The rancher tilted his head, frowning. "Yeah." Like a whimper. "Coyote, maybe." "Not a coyote," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She took another step, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. The buffalo snorted, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground, but he didn't charge. Instead, he shifted his weight, revealing a glimpse of something in the grass, a flash of fur, matted and bloodied, too large for a coyote. Lena's breath hitched. A bear. A grizzly, by the look of it, sprawled on the ground, its massive form heaving with shallow breaths. And around it, circling at a wary distance, were 3 jackals, their lean bodies slinking through the grass, their yips sharp and hungry. Lena's mind raced. Jackals in Montana? They weren't native, escaped exotics, maybe, or strays from some ill-advised private collection. But the grizzly was the real shock. It was alive, barely, its fur torn and blood-soaked, one foreleg bent at an unnatural angle. The buffalo stood over it like a sentinel, his massive frame a shield between the bear and the jackals. Every time one darted closer, the bull lowered his horns, his bellow a warning that shook the air. The jackals flinched but didn't retreat, their hunger driving them to test his resolve. "Sarah, get the radio," Lena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. "Call for backup, wildlife rescue, anyone who's close. Tell them we've got a wounded grizzly and a buffalo that's not budging." Sarah nodded, fumbling with the radio, her hands trembling. Tom stepped closer, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes wide. "Lena, that bull's not gonna let us near. And those jackals, they're not backing off." "I know," Lena said, her mind working fast. She'd studied buffalo behavior her entire career, knew their instincts to flee or fight when threatened. But this bull wasn't doing either. He was standing his ground, protecting a creature that wasn't his kin, wasn't even his species. The intelligence in his eyes, the deliberate way he positioned himself, it was unlike anything she'd seen. Her people had stories of Thinii as protectors, spirits of the prairie who carried the weight of the land's history. She'd always respected the lore, but this felt like something more, something real and urgent. She edged closer, her movements slow, deliberate. The buffalo's ears twitched, but he didn't charge. The grizzly moaned again, weaker now, and Lena caught a glimpse of its eyes, glazed with pain but alive, aware. The jackals yipped, emboldened by her approach, and one darted forward, jaws snapping. The buffalo lunged, his hooves churning the earth, and the jackal yelped, scrambling back. Lena's heart pounded, but she felt a surge of awe. This bull, wounded and weary, was risking everything to protect the bear. "Lena, you're too close," Tom hissed, his hand on his rifle. "He's hurt, he could turn on you." "He won't," Lena said, though she wasn't sure. She trusted her instincts, trusted the stories her grandfather had told her of buffalo who understood more than humans gave them credit for. She crouched low, her voice soft, almost a song. "Hey, big guy. I see you. I know you're hurting. Let me help." The buffalo's head lowered, his breath a heavy gust, and for a moment, she thought he might charge. But then he shifted, just enough to give her a clearer view of the grizzly. The bear's chest rose and fell, its wounds raw and deep, likely from the jackal's relentless attacks. The buffalo's own gash was bleeding freely now, staining the grass, but he stood firm, his eyes locked on Lena as if weighing her intent. Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. "Rescue's on the way. 30 minutes out. They're bringing a vet and tranquilizers." 30 minutes might be too late," Lena murmured. The grizzly's breathing was faltering, and the jackals were growing bolder, their circles tightening. She needed to act, but the buffalo was the key. He wasn't just guarding the bear, he was trusting her, in his own way, to understand. She scanned the scene, her eyes catching on a faint trail in the grass, leading away from the draw toward a cluster of cottonwoods. Tracks, maybe, or a sign of how the grizzly had ended up here. The mystery of it tugged at her, but there was no time to follow it now. The buffalo let out a low, rumbling bellow, not aggressive but urgent, as if urging her to move. Lena's chest tightened with a mix of fear and wonder. Whatever had brought this bull to this moment, whatever had driven him to stand over a dying grizzly in the face of predators, it was no ordinary instinct. There was a story here, one that went beyond biology, beyond anything she'd learned in her years of research. And it was unfolding right in front of her. She took a deep breath, the scent of sage and blood sharp in her nose, and made a choice. "Tom, Sarah, get ready. We're not waiting for rescue. We're going to save them both." The buffalo's eyes met hers again, and in that moment, Lena felt a connection, fragile but real, as if he understood her words. The grizzly moaned faintly, the jackals yipped, and the storm clouds rolled closer, casting long shadows across the prairie. Something was hidden here, something the buffalo was guarding with his life. And Lena was determined to find out what. The wind intensified, whipping Lena white feathers braid against her cheek as she crouched at the edge of the draw, her eyes darting between the massive buffalo bull and the wounded grizzly sprawled beneath him. The prairie stretched vast and unforgiving around them, the Two Medicine River a distant shimmer under the darkening sky. The air was thick with a metallic scent of blood and the sharp bite of an approaching storm, the horizon now a bruise of purple clouds. The buffalo, whom Lena was beginning to think of as Thunderheart for the deep rumble of his bellows, stood resolute, his blood-streaked flank heaving with each labored breath. His black eyes held hers, steady and unyielding, as if daring her to act. The grizzly's low moans punctuated the wind, weaker now, each one a faint plea for survival. The three jackals, lean, unnatural shadows in the Montana dusk, circled closer, their yips sharp and taunting. Lena's pulse raced, her mind piecing together the surreal scene, a buffalo, wounded and defiant, protecting a grizzly from predators that didn't belong here. She'd spent her career studying buffalo behavior, but this defied every textbook. Thunderheart wasn't just standing his ground, he was choosing to protect, to risk his life for a creature that should have been a rival, not an ally. "Tom, keep an eye on those jackals," Lena said, her voice low but firm. The rancher nodded, his rifle still slung but his hand tense on the strap. Sarah, the wildlife volunteer, clutched the radio, her face pale as she relayed updates to the rescue team, now 25 minutes out. Too long, Lena thought. The grizzly's breathing was shallow, its massive body trembling, and Thunderheart's gash was bleeding steadily, dark rivulets soaking the dry grass. Lena edged closer, her boots crunching softly on the gravelly soil. The buffalo snorted, his massive head lowering, but he didn't charge. Instead, he shifted slightly, his hooves stirring the dust, as if granting her permission to approach. She spoke softly, her voice a blend of Blackfeet cadence and scientific calm. "Easy, big guy. I'm here to help. Let me see what's going on." Her grandfather's stories echoed in her mind, tales of Thinii as guardians of the prairie, spirits who understood sacrifice. She'd always seen them as metaphors, but now, watching Thunderheart's deliberate stillness, she wasn't so sure. The grizzly lay in a shallow depression, its fur matted with blood and dirt, one foreleg twisted at an unnatural angle. Claw marks raked its side, deep and jagged, likely from the jackal's relentless attacks. But there was something else, a faint glint in the grass beside it, half buried under a tuft of sage. Lena squinted, her heart skipping. A metal tag, small and rusted, attached to a tattered collar. A research tag? A pet. The grizzly wasn't wild, then, or not entirely. The discovery sent a jolt through her, reframing the scene. Thunderheart wasn't just protecting a bear, he was guarding something with a story, something tied to humans. "Sarah, get a picture of that tag," Lena said, keeping her voice steady. "We need to know where this bear came from." Sarah nodded, her camera clicking as she zoomed in, her hands shaking slightly. Tom muttered under his breath, "Jackals, a collared bear, and a buffalo playing hero. What the hell's going on out here?" Lena didn't answer, her focus on Thunderheart. The bull's ears twitched, catching the jackal's yips, and he let out a low, guttural vocalization. Not a bellow, but something softer, almost mournful. It was directed at the grizzly, as if urging it to hold on. Lena's chest tightened. She'd read about buffalo communicating with their herd, but this was different. Targeted, intentional, like a conversation. She crept closer, her hands raised, and Thunderheart shifted again, his massive shoulder brushing the air inches from her. The heat of his body radiated, his musky scent overwhelming, but his eyes held no threat, only a weary resolve. The jackals darted in, emboldened by her proximity, and Thunderheart reacted instantly. He swung his head, horns slicing the air, and the lead jackal yelped, tumbling back. The others scattered but didn't flee, their hunger a palpable force. Lena's mind raced. She needed to stabilize the grizzly, but Thunderheart was the key. If he panicked or charged, they'd lose their chance. She glanced at the trail she'd noticed earlier, leading toward the cottonwoods. It was faint, marked by broken grass and scuffed earth, but it held clues, tire tracks, maybe, or signs of human presence. The jackals, the collared bear, the buffalo's behavior, it all pointed to something bigger, something that had brought these creatures together in this remote draw. "Tom, Sarah, we need to distract those jackals," Lena said. "Use the truck's horn, make noise, anything to keep them back." Tom nodded, jogging toward his pickup parked 100 yards away, while Sarah set the radio down and grabbed a metal canteen, banging it against a rock. The sharp clang echoed, and the jackals flinched, their ears pricking, but they didn't retreat far. Lena turned back to Thunderheart, her voice soft. "I know you're tired. I know you're hurting. But I need to get to that bear. Work with me, okay?" To her astonishment, Thunderheart let out a soft huff, his head dipping slightly, as if acknowledging her. She took another step, her heart pounding, and reached for her field kit, a small pack with basic medical supplies. The Grizzly's wounds were severe, but she could at least slow the bleeding until the rescue team arrived. She knelt beside the bear, keeping one eye on Thunderheart, who stood like a monolith, his breath a steady rhythm against the wind's howl. The Grizzly's eyes fluttered, meeting hers, and she saw a flicker of awareness, of trust, mirroring the buffalo's gaze. Lena worked quickly, spraying antiseptic on the worst of the gashes and wrapping a pressure bandage around the bear's flank. The Grizzly flinched but didn't thrash, as if sensing her intent. Thunderheart watched, his massive head tilted, and when a jackal darted too close, he stomped, the ground trembling under his weight. Lena's hands shook, not from fear but from awe. This buffalo wasn't just protecting the bear, he was collaborating, holding the line while she worked. She'd written papers on animal cognition, but this was beyond instinct, it was choice, sacrifice, a kind of compassion she'd never witnessed. The tag caught her eye again, and she leaned closer, brushing dirt from its surface. Numbers were etched into the metal, along with a partial logo, something official, maybe a wildlife agency or a private research group. "Sarah, you get that?" she called. Sarah nodded, her camera clicking. "Got it. Looks like a tracking tag, but it's old. Maybe from a reintroduction program." Lena's mind spun. Grizzly reintroduction was controversial in Montana, with ranchers and conservationists at odds. A collared bear this far out, attacked by jackals, guarded by a buffalo, it suggested human interference, maybe a botched release or an illegal operation. The tire tracks in the distance tugged at her thoughts, but there was no time to investigate now. The Grizzly's breathing was steadier, but Thunderheart's wasn't. His gash was deep, his strength waning, and yet he stood, unwavering, his eyes locked on the jackals. Tom's truck horn blared, a sharp blast that sent the jackals scattering momentarily. He jogged back, his face grim. "Lena, those things aren't leaving. And that storm's gonna hit soon. We need to move that bear." "I know," Lena said, her voice tight. She looked at Thunderheart, whose head was drooping now, blood pooling beneath him. "But he's not going to let us move anything unless we help him, too." She reached into her kit, pulling out a roll of gauze. It was a long shot, Buffalo didn't take kindly to human touch, but she had to try. She stood slowly, holding the gauze out, and spoke softly. "Thunderheart, I'm calling you that now. Let me help you, okay? You've done enough." The buffalo's ears flicked, and for a moment, she thought he'd bolt. But then he let out a low, rumbling sound, almost a sigh, and shifted his weight, exposing the gash. Lena's breath caught. It was a gesture of trust, fragile and fleeting. She moved quickly, spraying the wound with antiseptic and pressing the gauze against it, her hands brushing his coarse, woolly coat. He flinched, his muscles tensing, but didn't pull away. Sarah gasped behind her. "Lena, he's letting you touch him. That's not normal." "No," Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not." She secured the gauze, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. Thunderheart's eyes met hers again, and she felt a connection, raw and profound, as if he were speaking to her without words. The Grizzly moaned, the jackals yipped, and the storm's first raindrops began to fall, cold and sharp against her skin. The radio crackled. "Rescue's 10 minutes out," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "They're bringing a vet and a dart gun." Lena nodded, but her eyes were on the trail leading to the cottonwoods. The tire tracks, the collared bear, Thunderheart's impossible courage, It all pointed to a deeper story, one she needed to unravel. The buffalo's condition was worsening, the grizzly's survival uncertain, and the jackals were closing in again, undeterred by the rain. Whatever had brought these animals together, it wasn't chance. And Lena was determined to find out why. The rain began to fall in earnest, a cold, stinging curtain that blurred the Montana prairie and turned the dry earth to slick mud. Lightning cracked in the distance, illuminating the draw where Lena Whitefeather knelt beside the wounded grizzly, her hands slick with blood and antiseptic. The air was heavy with a musky scent of wet fur and the sharp tang of sagebrush, the wind now a relentless howl that drowned out all but the closest sounds. Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, stood over the bear, his 2,000-pound frame a steadfast barrier against the circling jackals. His chestnut coat was soaked, blood seeping through the gauze Lena had hastily applied to his flank, but his black eyes burned with resolve, locked on the predators that darted through the rain. Lena's heart pounded, her breath visible in the chill air. The grizzly's moans were faint now, its massive chest barely rising, the collared tag glinting dully under the storm's dim light. The jackals, undeterred by the rain or Tom's earlier horn blasts, grew bolder, their yips piercing the wind as they tested Thunderheart's defenses. The buffalo snorted, his hooves churning the mud, and swung his curved horns in a warning arc. The lead jackal yelped, retreating, but Lena knew time was running out. The rescue team was 8 minutes away, but the grizzly's life, and Thunderheart's, was hanging by a thread. "Sarah, keep those jackals back," Lena called, her voice nearly lost in the storm. The young volunteer nodded, banging her canteen against a rock, the metallic clang sharp but fleeting. Tom, standing a few yards away, gripped his rifle, his face taut with worry. "Lena, we can't wait for the team. That bear's fading, and your buffalo's not looking good." "I know," Lena said, her mind racing. She'd stabilized the grizzly's worst wounds, but the bear needed to be moved, somewhere safe, somewhere dry. Thunderheart was the obstacle and the ally. His trust in her, fragile as it was, had let her tend to the bear, but moving it would be another matter. She needed him to understand, to cooperate, in a way no buffalo should. Her grandfather's stories of Thinii as protectors echoed in her mind, but this was no myth. This was real, and it was now. She stood slowly, her boots slipping in the mud, and faced Thunderheart. Rain streamed down her face, blurring her vision, but she held his gaze. "Big guy, I need you to trust me again," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We've got to move the bear. You're keeping him alive, but we need to get him out of this storm." Thunderheart's ears twitched, his massive head tilting slightly, as if weighing her words. His breath came in heavy gusts, each one a testament to his pain and exhaustion, yet he stood firm, his hooves planted like roots in the earth. Lena glanced at the grizzly, its eyes half open, glazed but alive. The tag on its collar caught her eye again, numbers and a partial logo, a clue to its origins she'd have to unravel later. For now, the priority was survival. She turned to Tom. "Get the truck as close as you can. We'll need to slide the bear onto a tarp, drag it to the flatbed. But we can't spook Thunderheart." Tom hesitated, his eyes flicking to the buffalo. "You sure he won't charge? He's half dead and still looks like he could take us all out." "He won't," Lena said, though her pulse quickened. She trusted Thunderheart's intelligence, his inexplicable compassion, but trust was a gamble in the face of 2,000 pounds of muscle. She reached into her field kit, pulling out a heavy tarp, and spread it beside the grizzly. The jackals yipped, sensing her movement, and Thunderheart bellowed, a deep, resonant warning that shook the air. The sound sent a shiver down Lena's spine, not of fear but of awe. He was protecting the bear, even now, even as his strength waned. "Sarah, help me with the tarp," Lena said. Sarah scrambled over, her camera abandoned, and together they eased the tarp under the grizzly's hindquarters. The bear groaned, its body trembling, but didn't resist. Lena kept one eye on Thunderheart, who watched every move, his head lowered, horns glinting in the rain. She spoke to him softly, her voice a steady rhythm. "We're helping him, Thunderheart. Stay with me." To her astonishment, the buffalo took a step back, just enough to give them room. His eyes never left hers, and she felt a surge of connection, as if he understood her intent. She and Sarah worked quickly, sliding the tarp beneath the grizzly's bulk, their hands slipping in the mud. The bear was heavy, nearly 800 pounds, and every movement was a strain. Lena's muscles burned, her breath coming in sharp gasps, but she didn't stop. Thunderheart's presence was a steady anchor, his massive form shielding them from the jackal's advances. A sharp yip broke her focus. One of the jackals lunged, jaws snapping inches from the grizzly's flank. Before Lena could react, Thunderheart charged, a sudden explosion of power that sent mud flying. His horns caught the jackal, tossing it into the grass with a yelp. The other two scattered, their courage faltering, but Lena knew they'd be back. Thunderheart staggered, his wounded flank trembling, and for the first time, she saw him falter, his massive legs buckling slightly. No, stay with me, Lena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She abandoned the tarp and stepped toward him, her hands raised. You're doing so much. Just a little longer. Thunderheart's head dipped, his breath ragged, but he steadied himself, his eyes meeting hers again. The trust in that gaze was a weight and a gift, a silent pact between them. Tom's truck roared closer, its headlights cutting through the rain. He leapt out, dragging a rope from the flatbed. Lena, we've got to move now. Storm's getting worse, and those jackals aren't done. Lena nodded, her heart racing. She tied the rope to the tarp, looping it around the grizzly's torso, and signaled to Tom. Together, they pulled, the tarp sliding inch by inch across the mud. The grizzly groaned, its body limp but alive, and Lena kept talking, her voice a lifeline for both the bear and the buffalo. We're almost there, Thunderheart. You're doing this. You're saving him. Thunderheart moved with them, his hooves sinking into the mud, his body a shield against the jackals that circled at a distance. When they reached the truck, Lena climbed onto the flatbed, guiding the tarp as Tom and Sarah pushed. The grizzly's weight was crushing, but they managed to slide it onto the flatbed, its head resting against the metal. Lena checked its pulse, weak but steady, and covered it with a blanket to keep it warm. She turned to Thunderheart, who stood a few feet away, his head lowered, rain streaming off his horns. His gash was bleeding again, the gauze soaked through, and his breathing was labored. Lena's chest tightened. He'd held the line, protected the bear, trusted her, and now he was fading. She jumped down, her boots splashing in the mud, and approached him. You did it, she said, her voice breaking. You saved him. Now let me save you. Thunderheart let out a soft huff, his eyes softening, and for a moment, he leaned toward her, his massive head brushing her shoulder. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, and Lena felt tears mix with the rain on her cheeks. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his woolly flank, feeling the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his heart. We're not done, she whispered. Not yet. The jackals yipped in the distance, driven back by the truck's lights but not gone. The storm raged, lightning illuminating the prairie, and the rescue team's ETA was now 5 minutes. Lena looked at the grizzly, safe for now, and at Thunderheart, whose strength was a miracle in itself. The tire tracks she'd seen earlier, leading to the cottonwoods, loomed in her mind, a clue to this impossible scene, a question that demanded answers. But for now, the crisis was over, thanks to a buffalo who defied every expectation. Sarah's voice broke through the rain. Lena, they're here. Headlights pierced the storm, the rescue team's van skidding to a stop. Lena took a deep breath, her hand still on Thunderheart's flank. The buffalo's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she knew this was only the beginning. Something had brought these animals together, something bigger than chance, and she was determined to find out what. The storm had passed, leaving the Montana prairie drenched and shimmering under a tentative moon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet sagebrush and churned earth, the silence broken only by the distant call of a coyote and the soft hum of the rescue team's generator. Lena Whitefeather stood beside a makeshift enclosure near the Two Medicine River, her boots caked with mud, her hands still trembling from the intensity of the rescue. The grizzly, now stabilized with 4 fluids and sedatives, lay on a padded platform inside a wildlife transport trailer, its massive chest rising steadily. Thunderheart, the buffalo bull who had guarded it against all odds, stood in a temporary corral nearby, his chestnut coat glistening with rain, his wounded flank now stitched and bandaged by Dr. Maria Torres, the rescue team's veterinarian. Lena's eyes traced Thunderheart's form, his broad shoulders, the curve of his horns catching the moonlight, the slow, deliberate way he shifted his weight. The gash on his flank was deep, likely from a jackal's claws or the grizzly's own desperate thrashing, but he was recovering. His breathing was steadier, his eyes brighter, and when Lena approached the corral, he let out a low huff, almost a greeting. She smiled, her chest tightening with a mix of relief and awe. This buffalo, this Thinii, had done the impossible, protected a grizzly from jackals, trusted her to help, and survived a storm that could have killed them all. Dr. Torres, a wiry woman with a clipboard and a no-nonsense demeanor, joined Lena at the corral. "He's a tough one," she said, nodding toward Thunderheart. "Lost a lot of blood, but he's stable. I've never seen a buffalo let a human get that close, let alone cooperate like that. You sure he's not tame?" "He's wild," Lena said, her voice firm. "Wild as they come. But he's different." She didn't elaborate, didn't know how to explain the intelligence in Thunderheart's eyes, the way he'd seemed to understand her intent. Her grandfather's stories of buffalo as guardians of the prairie felt closer to truth than ever, but she kept that to herself for now. Tom Grayson, the rancher, and Sarah, the volunteer, stood nearby, helping the rescue team pack up equipment. The jackals had vanished into the night, driven off by the team's arrival, but their presence lingered in Lena's mind, an anomaly, like the grizzly's collar. She glanced at the trailer, where the bear's tag lay in an evidence bag, its rusted surface etched with numbers and a partial logo, MT-WR 47. Montana Wildlife Research maybe, but the logo was unfamiliar, and the collar was old, frayed, suggesting years in the wild or a forgotten project. "We need to figure out where that bear came from," Lena said, her voice low. "And those jackals, they're not native. Someone brought them here, or they escaped. Either way, it's trouble." She thought of the tire tracks she'd seen leading toward the cottonwoods, now blurred by the rain but still a clue. Something had drawn these animals together, and Thunderheart's actions were at the heart of it. Dr. Torres nodded, jotting notes. "The bear's a male, about 8 years old, underweight but not starved. Those wounds, mostly from the jackals, but some older ones look like they're from a fight. Maybe another bear, or something else. That collar's got me curious, though. I'll run the tag number through the database when we get back to Missoula." Lena's gaze returned to Thunderheart, who was nosing at a pile of hay the team had provided. His coat, though matted, was regaining its luster, and when he lifted his head, his eyes met hers. She felt a tug, a bond forged in the chaos of the storm. "You're a fighter," she murmured, her hand resting on the corral's rail. Thunderheart snorted softly, as if in agreement, and Lena's thoughts drifted to her Blackfeet heritage, to the stories of Thinii as protectors of the land and its creatures. She'd always seen them as symbols, but Thunderheart was real, his courage undeniable. The next morning, with the prairie drying under a pale sun, Lena followed the tire tracks she'd spotted. The trail led a half-mile to a grove of cottonwoods, where she found a clearing marked by scuffed earth and broken branches. Tire marks, deep and recent, suggested a heavy vehicle, a truck or an ATV. Nearby, a pile of discarded gear caught her eye, a torn canvas bag, a broken syringe, and a crumpled note, half buried in the mud. Lena knelt, her fingers brushing the paper as she unfolded it. The ink was smudged, but she could make out fragments: relocation, failed, containment breach, and a name, Carson. Her stomach twisted. Carson could be a person, a place, or a code, but the words, containment breach, screamed trouble. Poaching, illegal wildlife trafficking, or a botched research project. She bagged the note and scanned the clearing, noting paw prints and claw marks that matched the grizzlies. The jackal's tracks were there too, chaotic and overlapping, as if they'd been chasing something. Thunderheart must have stumbled into this mess, she thought, his instincts driving him to protect the grizzly from a threat neither should have faced. Back at the enclosure, the rescue team prepared to move the grizzly to a wildlife sanctuary in Missoula, where it could recover under veterinary care. Thunderheart, too, would be relocated temporarily to a nearby preserve where Lena could monitor his healing. The logistics were daunting. Moving a 2,000-pound buffalo wasn't simple, but Lena insisted on staying involved. "He trusts me," she told Dr. Torres. "I'm not leaving him." As they loaded the Grizzly, a new figure arrived. Sheriff Deputy Elena Ruiz, a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard and a skeptical frown. "Heard you had a hell of a night," she said, eyeing the corral. "Buffalo saving a bear? That's a new one. But those jackals, Fish and Wildlife's already getting calls about exotic pets, probably, let loose by some idiot collector. We're looking into it." Lena handed her the bagged note. "Found this by some tire tracks. Might be related." Deputy Ruiz raised an eyebrow, tucking the note into her pocket. "I'll run it through the lab." "But Lena, this story's already spreading. Ranchers are talking, and someone tipped off a reporter from Billings. You might have a circus on your hands soon." Lena's jaw tightened. Public attention could help, raising awareness for conservation, but it could also complicate things. She glanced at Thunderheart, who was grazing now, his massive head lowered, his presence a quiet anchor. The media would see a hero, a symbol, but to her, he was more, a partner, a mystery, a reminder of the land's resilience. That afternoon, as the Grizzly was loaded onto a transport truck, Lena approached Thunderheart's corral. The buffalo lifted his head, his eyes locking onto hers, and let out a low bellow, deep and resonant, like a call across the prairie. She climbed the rail, her voice soft. "You're going to be okay, big guy. We're going to figure this out. Together." He stepped closer, his warm breath brushing her hand, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them, the scientist and the buffalo, bound by an unspoken promise. Dr. Torres called out, interrupting the moment. "Lena, we got a hit on the bear's tag. It's from a defunct research project, Montana Wildlife Research, shut down 10 years ago. They were studying grizzly behavior, but the funding dried up, and some animals were never accounted for. This guy might have been out here all this time." Lena's mind raced. A lost research bear, jackals, a mysterious note. It was a puzzle, and Thunderheart was at its center. The tire tracks suggested human involvement, maybe someone dumping exotic animals or covering up a failed experiment. She looked at Thunderheart, his coat gleaming in the sun, his strength returning. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" she murmured. "You saw it, and you acted." As the team prepared to move Thunderheart to the preserve, a news van pulled up, its antenna glinting in the sunlight. A reporter from Billings, eager for a story, was already asking questions. Lena sighed, knowing the buffalo's tale was about to go viral. But her focus was elsewhere, on the note, the tracks, and the buffalo who'd risked everything for a creature not his own. A plan was forming: reunite Thunderheart with his herd, protect the Grizzly, and uncover the truth behind this strange convergence. The prairie held secrets, and Lena was ready to dig. The late summer sun hung low over the Montana prairie, casting golden light across the rolling hills of the newly established Two Medicine Preserve, a 5,000-acre sanctuary carved out of ranchland and tribal territory. The air was warm, scented with blooming wildflowers and the faint musk of grazing buffalo. Lena Whitefeather stood on a rise, her field jacket slung over her shoulder, her dark braids swaying as she watched Thunderheart gallop across the open plain. The buffalo bull, now fully recovered, moved with a majesty that took her breath away. His 2,000-pound frame a ripple of muscle, his chestnut coat gleaming, his curved horns catching the light. The gash on his flank was a faint scar, a testament to his resilience, and his deep bellow echoed across the preserve, answered by the distant calls of his herd. It had been 3 months since that stormy night when Lena found Thunderheart guarding a wounded grizzly against jackals. The grizzly, named Coda by the sanctuary staff, was recovering in Missoula, his broken leg healing and his strength returning. The story of Thunderheart's courage had spread like wildfire, fueled by the Billings reporter's viral article and a grainy video Sarah had posted on X. Scientists, conservationists, and native elders had descended on the Two Medicine region, drawn by the buffalo's unprecedented act of interspecies compassion. Lena, at the center of it all, had become an accidental advocate, her expertise and Blackfeet heritage amplifying her voice. The preserve was the result of that whirlwind, a coalition of tribal leaders, wildlife biologists, and state officials, spurred by Thunderheart's story, had secured funding to protect this stretch of prairie. Lena had testified before the Montana legislature, her voice steady as she described Thunderheart's intelligence, his trust, his sacrifice. "He's not just an animal," she'd said, her eyes meeting those of skeptical lawmakers. "He's a reminder of what we've almost lost, and what we can still save." The preserve wasn't just for Thunderheart, it was for his herd, for the grizzly, for the prairie ecosystem that hung by a thread. Lena's boots crunched on the dry grass as she walked toward the preserve's observation post, a simple wooden platform overlooking the herd. Thunderheart was grazing now, his massive head lowered, but when he heard her approach, he lifted his eyes, locking onto hers. She smiled, her chest tightening with a familiar ache. That night in the storm had changed her. She'd come to the prairie seeking data, a scientist chasing patterns, but Thunderheart had shown her something deeper, a connection that transcended species, a purpose rooted in the land her ancestors had stewarded for centuries. Dr. Maria Torres joined her at the platform, her clipboard replaced by a tablet filled with research notes. "He's thriving," Maria said, nodding toward Thunderheart. "Blood works perfect, scars healed, and he's reintegrated with the herd. But you know what's wild? He still looks for you. Every time you're here, he finds you." Lena's throat tightened. "I feel it too," she said softly. She'd visited Thunderheart weekly since his relocation, each time struck by his recognition. A soft huff, a tilt of his head, a step closer to the fence. She'd never touched him again, not since that night, but the bond was there, unspoken and unbreakable. The investigation into the grizzly and jackals had yielded answers, though not without resistance. The note Lena found, relocation, failed, containment breach. Carson, led to a defunct wildlife trafficking ring. Carson was a man, a disgraced biologist who'd worked on the Montana Wildlife Research Project a decade ago. He'd been running an illegal operation, capturing grizzlies and exotic animals like jackals for private collectors. Coda, the grizzly, had been one of his subjects, released into the wild when the operation collapsed under federal scrutiny. The jackals, likely escaped from a buyer, had turned feral, attacking Coda until Thunderheart intervened. Sheriff Deputy Ruiz had tracked Carson to a rundown cabin in Wyoming, where he was arrested with enough evidence to dismantle what remained of his network. The revelation had sparked outrage, fueling public support for the preserve. Lena had worked with tribal elders to ensure the land respected Blackfeet traditions, incorporating cultural practices into its management. The preserve wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a statement, a reclaiming of the prairie for its original stewards, human and animal alike. Researchers from across the country were now studying Thunderheart's herd, their data confirming what Lena had suspected. Buffalo displayed complex social behaviors, including rare instances of interspecies empathy. Thunderheart's actions were a scientific anomaly, but to Lena, they were a story her people had always known. She faced challenges, too. Some ranchers opposed the preserve, fearing it would limit grazing rights, and bureaucratic delays had nearly derailed the funding. Lena had spent sleepless nights drafting proposals, meeting with stakeholders, and navigating tensions between conservationists and locals. But every time she doubted herself, she'd visit Thunderheart, his steady presence grounding her. She'd lost her father to illness 2 years prior, a wound that had left her adrift, questioning her purpose. Thunderheart had given her one, reminding her why she'd chosen this path: to protect the land, to honor its creatures, to carry forward her people's legacy. Today, the preserve was hosting its first public event, a guided tour for local schools and media, a chance to showcase Thunderheart and the herd. Lena stood at the platform, addressing a small crowd of children, teachers, and reporters. Her voice carried the cadence of her Blackfeet heritage, woven with the precision of her scientific training. "This is Thunderheart," she said, gesturing to the buffalo, who stood 100 yards away, his eyes fixed on her. "He saved a grizzly from danger, not because he had to, but because he chose to. He's teaching us what compassion looks like, what it means to protect something bigger than yourself." A child raised her hand, her eyes wide. "Does he know you helped him?" Lena smiled, her gaze softening as it met Thunderheart's. "I think he does." The crowd murmured, cameras clicking, and Lena felt a surge of hope. The preserve was a start, But the bigger fight, restoring the prairie, protecting its keystone species, was just beginning. As the tour ended, Lena lingered at the platform, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Thunderheart approached the fence, his hooves a steady rhythm on the earth, and stopped a few feet away. He let out a low bellow, deep and resonant, and Lena felt it vibrate in her chest. She climbed down, standing just beyond the fence, and spoke softly. "You changed everything, you know that? You gave me a reason to keep going." Thunderheart huffed, his warm breath visible in the cooling air, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the prairie stretching vast around them. Lena's transformation was complete, not just as a scientist, but as a woman reclaiming her place in the world. Thunderheart's courage had sparked a movement, a new understanding of buffalo intelligence, and a sanctuary that would protect his kind for generations. The broader impact was undeniable. The preserve had inspired a statewide initiative to expand protected lands, with talks of a national buffalo corridor gaining traction. Researchers were publishing papers on Thunderheart's behavior, citing it as evidence of complex cognition in bison. Lena had been invited to speak at a conservation conference in Denver, her story, and Thunderheart's, reaching a global audience. The Blackfeet Nation was planning a ceremony to honor the buffalo, a cultural reclamation that filled Lena with pride. As the last light faded, Lena touched the fence, her fingers brushing the wood. "We did it, big guy," she whispered. Thunderheart's eyes gleamed, and he turned, galloping back to his herd, his silhouette a symbol of resilience against the sunset. Lena knew the work wasn't done, there were policies to fight for, ecosystems to restore, but for now, she felt a rare peace. Thunderheart was home, and so was she. The two medicine preserves stretched beneath a late autumn sky, its rolling hills dusted with frost, the air sharp with the scent of pine and frozen grass. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the prairie, where a herd of buffalo moved like a slow tide, their deep bellows echoing in the quiet. Lena Whitefeather stood at the edge of a bluff, her breath visible in the chill, her dark eyes fixed on Thunderheart. The massive buffalo bull, now a living legend, grazed at the herd center, his chestnut coat thick and lustrous, his 2,000-pound frame a testament to resilience. His scar, a faint line on his flank, was barely visible, but to Lena, it was a map of their shared journey, a stormy night, a wounded grizzly, a bond that had changed everything. It had been 6 months since Lena found Thunderheart guarding Coda, the grizzly, against a pack of jackals in a remote Montana draw. The story had rippled far beyond the prairie, igniting a movement. The Two Medicine Preserve, now a thriving sanctuary, was a beacon of hope, its 5,000 acres a haven for buffalo, elk, and the grizzly, who had been released back into the wild with a new tracking collar. Thunderheart, named by the Blackfeet elders in a ceremony that honored his courage, had become an ambassador for his species, his image gracing conservation campaigns and tribal art. Lena, too, had become a voice, a wildlife biologist and Blackfeet woman whose story of interspecies compassion inspired millions. The bluff where Lena stood was now a memorial site, marked by a simple stone plaque etched with Thunderheart's name and the words, "Thinii, guardian of the prairie, who showed us the power of compassion." The plaque had been unveiled a month ago, during a gathering of tribal leaders, scientists, and community members. Lena had spoken then, her voice steady but thick with emotion, describing how Thunderheart's actions had redefined her understanding of the land and its creatures. The crowd had listened in silence, their faces reflecting awe, and when Thunderheart bellowed from the herd below, the sound had felt like a blessing. Now, alone on the bluff, Lena traced the plaque's words with her fingers, her thoughts drifting to the broader impact of Thunderheart's legacy. The preserve had sparked a national conversation, with lawmakers proposing a Great Plains buffalo corridor to connect fragmented habitats. Researchers had published 3 papers on Thunderheart's behavior, their data confirming high levels of emotional intelligence in bison, challenging decades of assumptions. The Blackfeet Nation had launched a youth program, teaching children about Thinii and their role as keystone species, blending science with cultural wisdom. Lena had become its lead instructor, finding purpose in sharing her story with the next generation. The investigation into Coda's origins had closed, but its fallout lingered. Carson, the disgraced biologist behind the trafficking ring, was serving a 5-year sentence, his operation exposed as a network that had exploited dozens of animals, from grizzlies to exotic jackals. The case had prompted stricter regulations on wildlife research and trade, with Montana leading the charge. Lena had testified in those hearings, her voice carrying the weight of Thunderheart's sacrifice. She'd also worked with tribal elders to ensure the preserve respected Blackfeet traditions, its management a model of collaboration between science and culture. Lena's transformation was complete. The loss of her father had left her adrift, her work a refuge but not a purpose. Thunderheart had changed that, his trust in her a mirror that reflected her own strength. She'd once seen herself as a scientist first, her Blackfeet heritage a quiet backdrop. Now, she wove both into her life, speaking at conferences in Denver and Geneva, her words a bridge between worlds. She'd found a home in the prairie, a calling in protecting its creatures, and a family in the community that rallied around Thunderheart's story. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Lena walked toward the herd. Thunderheart lifted his head, his black eyes meeting hers across the distance. He broke from the group, his hooves a steady rhythm on the frosted grass, and stopped a few yards away. His bellow was low, resonant, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the prairie itself. Lena smiled, her heart full. "You started this, big guy," she said softly. "You showed us what's possible." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small braid of sweetgrass, a gift from her grandmother. She placed it on the ground, a gesture of thanks, and stepped back. Thunderheart snorted, his warm breath a cloud in the cold air, and nudged the braid gently, as if acknowledging her offering. The moment was quiet, sacred, a final thread in the bond they'd forged. Lena turned to the horizon, her thoughts shifting to you, the reader. Thunderheart's story isn't just his, it's a call to see the world differently. Have you ever witnessed an animal's act of courage, a moment that made you question what you thought you knew? The prairie is alive with such stories, waiting for us to listen. Support the sanctuaries that protect creatures like Thunderheart. Share his tale, not just as a story, but as a spark to act. Donate to conservation, volunteer, or simply walk the land with open eyes. Compassion crosses boundaries, and love, as Thunderheart showed, can change the world. The buffalo turned, his silhouette a dark curve against the sunset, and rejoined his herd. Lena watched, her hand resting on the plaque, its stone warm from the day's sun. The prairie stretched vast and eternal, its heartbeat steady in Thunderheart's bellows, its future brighter because of him. She whispered a Blackfeet prayer, her voice mingling with the wind, and knew this was only the beginning. The land, its creatures, and its people were bound together, and Thunderheart had shown them how to fight for it.